Subcommittee on National Security will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. We're here today to talk about the bureaucratic challenges to recovery after one of the most devastating hurricane seasons in history. Exactly 6 months ago yesterday, Hurricane Maria, a monster of a storm, struck our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico. The island sustained deadly 155-mile-an-hour winds and 20 to 30 inches of rainfall in a period of just 24 hours. Sadly, lives were lost as a result. Now, the President took action by deploying the full weight of the United States government. Within 6 days of Maria's landfall, more than 10,000 federal employees were deployed to aid in the recovery. Puerto Rico's residents were completely without electricity. Thousands of homes and businesses were destroyed. Individuals found themselves with no power, no water, and no way to communicate with one another. Emergency response crews have operated around the clock to restore these critical services ever since, but there's still more to do. Thanks to the hard work and generosity of countless people, thousands of meals and gallons of water have been distributed. Children are back in school, and the most vulnerable, again, have access to medical care. But we need to do more. As of last week, there were still as many as 150,000 people without power across the island. Interruptions due to overloads or equipment failures still happen virtually weekly. Additionally, 96% of the island now has access to potable drinking water, but when you look at the different regions, you see, for example, that 17% of the population in the western portion of the island are still lacking their own safe water supply. 88% of the gas stations are up and running, 92% of grocery stores are open, but 2/5 of the roadways are still either closed or impassable. And more than 890 generators are still the primary source of power for some key facilities, including the wastewater treatment plants and the San Juan Financial District. In the aftermath, over 6 months, due to the lack of basic services, hundreds of thousands of citizens in Puerto Rico found themselves making the hard choice to relocate due to the need to find jobs because their workplaces were out of business, so they could send their kids to school and care for their elders. They have moved to many states. One of the main points of entry has been my state of Florida, where there's been a major effort to offer relocation assistance. Many of these citizens await normalization to return to the island, while others are surely staying for the long term. But all of them want to know, when will their hometowns and their families be able to fully stand back on their feet? They do not forget Puerto Rico, and neither do we. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is the lead coordinator on all things disaster-related, overseeing the historic interagency effort underway in Puerto Rico. I want to hear FEMA's perspective on what went right and what could have been done better and what still needs to be done. Mr. Michael Beeran, the Assistant Administrator for Field Operations, is joining us here today to shed some light on FEMA's role in the recovery. While we have heard a lot about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' role in the effort to restore power to Puerto Rico, the Department of Energy is actually the lead agency for Emergency Support Function Number 12, the Energy Annex. The Department is responsible for facilitating the restoration of damaged energy systems and components, which was certainly needed in Puerto Rico. We have a representative here today from Energy's Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability to discuss the progress being made on the ground and the work yet to be done. So I want to thank Mr. Parks for being here. These two officials should help us shed light on what it will take to get the power fully restored, and we will want to know what it will take to make the part of the task so that the effort is continued without interruptions. Another critical element of restoring Puerto Rico is the access to safe, drinkable water and the removal of solid waste. Mr. Peter Lopez from the Environmental Protection Agency is here to testify about EPA's role in ensuring the residents of Puerto Rico can and will have access to safe drinking water and what the federal, state, and local authorities need to do to ensure this in the future. We also have Scott Aronson from the Edison Electric Institute. EEI represents all U.S. investor-owned electric companies. In response to a request for assistance, EEI coordinated with its members to deploy incident management teams in support of power restoration efforts across the island. Through this agreement, industry experts coordinate with the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority and the Army Corps to restore power to the people of Puerto Rico. All told, almost 6,700 federal personnel, civilian and military, are currently supporting the recovery and restoration efforts in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Thousands more from non-government and charitable organizations have come forward to help get Puerto Rico back on its feet. So we want to discuss what lessons we've learned from this devastation before the next hurricane season is upon us. We also want to hear what changes are being made to ensure we do better going forward, and that the lessons learned to help the nation be better prepared for such catastrophic events. And the Puerto Rico, I mean, they're going to face another hurricane season here in just a few months, and I think it's important that we solve all these problems by then. So I want to thank you for your efforts to date and for coming to answer our questions. And with that, I will yield 5 minutes to the ranking member, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for convening this hearing to examine the progress of federal hurricane relief and recovery efforts in Puerto Rico. I'd also like to thank our witnesses for your willingness to help this subcommittee with its work. It is the mission of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, to, quote, lead America to prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters with a vision of a nation prepared, close quote. The critical role of FEMA is as our nation's coordinating federal entity in response to all domestic disasters demands that the agency operate at maximum efficiency in order to mitigate the devastating effects of national emergencies on the safety and security of the American people. In the aftermath of the landfall of two Category 5 hurricanes, Irma and Maria, just 2 weeks apart on Puerto Rico in September of 2017, FEMA has led federal relief and recovery efforts to provide emergency food and water, temporary housing, health care, power grid restoration, and other basic services to the survivors of this continuing humanitarian crisis. Regrettably, however, the agency's mission has been greatly impaired by many of the same oversight challenges that undermined the failed federal response to Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. Puerto Rico and its 3.5 million American citizens deserves better. I think we all agree on that. As reported by the Select Committee to investigate the preparation for and response to Hurricane Katrina in 2006, FEMA logistics and contracting systems did not support a targeted, massive, and sustained provision of commodities. That was the finding to affected Gulf residents. The agency did not have advanced contracts in place that anticipated what supplies would be needed in the wake of a hurricane. According to the Select Committee, this, quote, led to chaos and the potential for waste and fraud as acquisitions were made in haste, close quote. Our own committee hearings into Katrina contracting in 2006 revealed instances where debris removal contractors would arrive at a federal dump site, check in, and then drive away, only to return later with the same truckload of debris and receive double payment. The federal government also spent millions of dollars on contracts with companies to install temporary blue plastic sheeting on damaged homes. These blue roofs were billed to the American taxpayer but never installed. Despite the lessons learned from Hurricane Katrina more than a decade ago, we are once again receiving a similar report of waste, fraud, and abuse in federal contracting relating to the Puerto Rican relief effort. Nearly 1 month after the hurricane hit the island, FEMA awarded a $156 million contract to a one-person company owned by Tiffany Brown, Tribute Contracting, LLC, to provide 30 million emergency meals. Ms. Brown received the contract despite her failure to fulfill at least 5 previous and much smaller federal contracts. This is one woman. Those previous contracts included a 27,000 federal prison system contract that was canceled because she could not deliver the required beans, flour, and spaghetti and other food. As the sole employee of her company, Ms. Brown sought help in fulfilling her new FEMA contract and hired a wedding caterer with 11 employees to freeze dry meals. In a letter sent to FEMA last month, members of the Senate Government Affairs Committee also underscored that Ms. Brown's initial 9-page bid appeared to be plagiarized from several readily available sources on the Internet. While FEMA eventually canceled the contract after Ms. Brown could only deliver 50,000 of the required 30 million meals, the residents of Puerto Rico, the American taxpayer, and this committee are left asking how FEMA could have awarded the contract in the first place. Similarly, in October of 2017, the agency awarded 2 contracts totaling $30 million to a newly formed Florida company, Bronze Star LLC to provide emergency tops and plastic sheeting for repairs in Puerto Rico. The company was owned by Richard and Keon Jones, two brothers operating out of a single-family house. They had never received a federal contract or delivered these materials before. FEMA also eventually canceled the contracts in November and admitted that it had not performed due diligence. President Trump has graded the federal relief and recovery effort in Puerto Rico as, quote, great, close quote, amazing, close quote, tremendous, and a 10 out of 10. I don't think so. It may have been a 10 for Tiffany Brown and the Jones brothers, but it surely hasn't been a 10 for the people of Puerto Rico or for the U.S. taxpayer. In light of these and other reports, congressional oversight will serve an even more critical role in ensuring that our massive recovery effort will not be further impeded by a failure to properly vet federal contractors. I strongly urge the agency to comply with this committee's request for documents pertaining to the federal preparedness and response to Hurricanes Irma and Maria in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. This includes a bipartisan document request by our full committee chairman, Chairman Gowdy, and Ranking Member Cummings over 5 months ago. I'd also urge the leadership of this committee to organize a bipartisan oversight delegation to the damaged areas, as we did in 2005 following Hurricane Katrina. I know that the Massachusetts delegation, led by Senator Elizabeth Warren, were there in January and brought back a very informative report. But that would allow us to conduct direct oversight of federal recovery efforts, receive firsthand accounts from the affected people, and hopefully get this right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really do appreciate you holding this hearing, and I look forward to discuss these and other issues with our witnesses, and I yield back the balance of our time.
I thank the gentleman. The chair notes the presence of our colleague from Puerto Rico, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, and without objection, I move that she be recognized and allowed to participate in today's hearing. There being none, I would like to take this opportunity to actually recognize her for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I want to begin this saying thank you to you, Chairman DeSantis and Ranking Member Leach, for agreeing to have this very important hearing on Puerto Rico and agreeing to have this meeting of the challenge of the recovery process on the island. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you particularly on behalf of my 3.4 million American citizens living in Puerto Rico, because of your steadfast leadership and support in the aftermath of the hurricanes Irma and Maria, not only for the residents of the island, but also for the hundreds of thousands who have, since the hurricane, been forced to move to your home state of Florida. And one of the main issues we still face in the island is the great anxiety and the frustration that among all the citizens in the island over the time it has taken to get the power being restored. One of the main issues is in the private sector, the individuals and businesses had to rely on generators at high cost and environmental impact, and it has caused considerable business losses and from closures, limited hours, and cost overruns. Specifically, the people with medication pumps, respirators, and alike, it has caused considerable situations. There have been municipalities where no resident had power until late January, and we were talking about more than 100,000 people still without power. And that's one thing. I want to say also that I want to thank the witnesses that are here today to give us some light about that recovery process. And with that, I want to say thank you to Mr. Byrne. He's always been available to all my calls and all that recovery process. And I want to thank you because I know you've been away from home many hours, and you're people from FEMA, and I know you're doing your job. We still need more, and I hope this hearing will help us out to establish what is needed from Congress, what is needed from the federal government. Same thing to the rest of the federal agencies. Over the last 3 weeks, residents of the island has been subject to great stress and worry upon learning that many repair and construction crews have ended in terms of their contracts or are being relocated to higher priority locations. There is some shock on the island and dismay at the impression that the mission is winding down before the job is finished, in the apparent lack of a concerted effort to explain what is happening. A rural working family without electricity for 6 months does not want to hear of standard protocols or contract restrictions. They want to see full effort directed to reconnecting every remaining home everywhere. And we're talking about everywhere in the island, not just the metropolitan area and the northern side of the island. We're talking about the central part or the towns where the hurricane made landfall. I said it in another hearing last week, and I will say it again. I just want you to imagine if your own hometown here in the mainland will be without electricity for 2 months, 3, 4, 6 months, without power, with also failing communications, with the only assurance that we are working on it. What will happen? The people of Puerto Rico has been admirably patient, but are justifiably tired. If we were a state, we would have been and having 5 congressional districts and 2 senators who will not leave the state. Nobody will leave the state without power for 6 months. And now we're facing the next hurricane season in 3 months. So that's the biggest challenge that we're facing. That's the reason this hearing is so important for us. We are now at over 90% capacity online, but still less than 80% of transmission and distribution lines at full load. That means that the Corps of Engineers estimated that 95% of the capacity will be up by the end of March. But that not necessarily means that the 100,000 people will have power in their houses by the end of August of this year. So that's my biggest challenge, and that's the reason we need to know the reality. That's the reason we need to know what do we need to have a 30-day time frame in terms of FEMA, Corps of Engineers, all the federal agencies to make that happen. If it's assigning the money, if amending the rules, is amending the resources in terms of another CR, what do we need to make that happen? For that, we need to bear in mind that rebuilding needs to be done in such a manner as to consider the possibility of such a catastrophic event happening again. Hurricane season starts, as we already said, in 3 months, and we have presented with other colleagues from both sides of the aisle amendments to open up the staff for act limits so we can be more flexible and not just patch up what is broken, but rebuild to update standards, Section 2601 of last month's CR. There are also $2 billion in that continuing resolution specifically meant for improvement of the power grid. We also know that that's not even close to what we need, but at least that's a start, and we must maintain the sense of urgency that sometimes is missing. With that, I will yield back the balance of my time. I will save the rest for the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, great. Thank you, my friend from Puerto Rico. Now, you just heard the votes have been called. I got 5 of you to give opening statements, so I think it's probably wise that we just briefly recess this. We'll go vote. It's probably going to be a 30-minute evolution. So what, we reconvene? I mean, 10:45, 10:50? Yeah, probably no earlier than 10:45. And so I appreciate the witnesses' indulgence on this. Anytime you do these hearings, if we did it 2 o'clock yesterday, we would have had votes then. So the subcommittee will recess at the call of the chair. We plan to return immediately at the conclusion of votes. So committee stands in recess. Subcommittee will come to order. Appreciate the indulgence of the witnesses as we tackle the ominous omnibus bill. It's my pleasure to introduce our witnesses. We have Michael Byrne, Assistant Administrator for Field Operations at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. William Park, Senior Advisor to Assistant Secretary at the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability at the U.S. Department of Energy. Mr. Peter Lopez, Regional Administrator for Region 2 at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Scott Aronson, Vice President for Security and Preparedness at EEI. And Staff Sergeant Jonathan Sutton, U.S. Army retired, a volunteer in Puerto Rico during this recovery effort. Welcome to you all. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, please be seated. All witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record. As a reminder, the clock in front of you shows the remaining time during your opening statement. The light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds left and red when your time is up. Please also remember to press the button to turn your microphone on before speaking. And with that, I would like to recognize Mr. Byrne for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, and Representative Gonzalez Colon, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Mike Byrne, and I'm the Federal Coordinating Officer in Puerto Rico. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. In the emergency management community, we talk about needing to be prepared for the big one. Last fall, Puerto Rico experienced the catastrophic impacts that we train our entire careers for. Hurricane Maria is the 5th strongest storm, and it's the strongest storm to strike Puerto Rico in nearly a century. Storm left nearly all of Puerto Rico's 3.5 million people without power, and the lack of backup generators shut down other critical infrastructure like water treatment plants and hospitals. Communications were decimated, hindering initial operations. Seaports, airstrips were severely damaged, resulting in limited initial access to bring in commodities. Roads and bridges were washed away, cutting off isolated, hard-to-reach communities. Following the devastation of this catastrophic storm, FEMA and the Commonwealth and our other federal partners took immediate action. We established the largest domestic sea bridge operation in U.S. history, delivering more than $1 billion in commodities such as food, water, tarps, and construction materials. These commodities were delivered by air, off-road vehicles, and often by foot, making it the largest and longest commodity delivery mission in FEMA's history. And it is still going on. Also, one of the largest medical response missions, more than 4,700 medical personnel deployed and cared for more than 38,000 survivors. FEMA mission assigned 80 federal agencies with more than 700 distinct mission assignments, supporting power restoration, temporary power, debris removal, et cetera, all of the different response functions that we do. At the height of the response, there were nearly 19,000 federal personnel deployed to Puerto Rico, working around the clock with territorial and local officials. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, mission assigned by FEMA, installed more than 1,900 generators, emergency generators. To put that in context, previously the most installed was 310 during Katrina. We still have over 800 of those still working. While there's lots of work to be done, we've seen significant signs of progress. More than 90% of the power has been restored, with crews working round the clock in treacherous mountainous terrain to work on lines as quickly and safely as possible. PRASA reports nearly 99% of their customers have water restored. More than 6.4 million cubic yards of debris has been removed. All 68 hospitals are back in operation and have been since mid-November. More than $10 billion has already been spent between FEMA and SBA assistance programs and has been approved for the response and recovery efforts. We're also committed to identifying solutions around housing. From direct financial assistance to direct repairs, we're working every avenue possible to restore housing. In order to meet the long-term recovery needs as moving into recovery, FEMA and our partners are implementing the structure and functions of the National Disaster Recovery Framework in Puerto Rico. We've established 12 sectors to holistically address the magnitude of the damage across these systems and how we can combine and leverage resources to more effectively and efficiently restore these systems. Thanks to authorities given to us by Congress, in the Bipartisan Budget Act last month, we can now provide assistance funding to Puerto Rico for critical services to replace or restore infrastructure to industry standards without regard to their pre-disaster conditions. We can also replace or restore components not damaged by the disaster when it is necessary to restore the entire system to industry standards. These new authorities are critical to ensuring we help build back a more resilient Puerto Rico. We're also getting ready for the 2018 hurricane season. We've already hired over 1,500 local hires on the island, Puerto Ricans, and it's actually 52% of my workforce right now, and I plan to get to 90% by the one-year anniversary. We're also doing training. We're also resupplying our warehouses with stockpiles, adjusting our national-level contracts. We're also going to be doing a significant amount of training and exercises. In fact, we have 3 major exercises scheduled before the end of June. Hurricanes Irma and Maria, along with all the other 2017 disasters, highlight the importance of preparing for the worst. As Administrator Long unveiled last week, FEMA's strategic plan includes the goal of building a culture of preparedness and readying the nation for catastrophic disasters. I encourage Congress and Americans across the country to partner with us as we look to get the nation more prepared. I appreciate the opportunity to testify for you today. Look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parks, you're up for 5 minutes.
Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, Representative Gonzalez, and other members, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. The mission of DOE's Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability is to develop innovative solutions to ensure that our nation's energy infrastructure remains reliable, affordable, and resilient. In order to fulfill this mission, we leverage the technical capabilities of the national laboratories, the power marketing authorities, and partnership with the private sector. Our organization is the lead for providing energy-related expertise to FEMA, interagency partners, and the Administration Emergency Response Activities. We're the coordinating agency for Emergency Support Function 12 under the National Response Framework and the sector-specific agency for energy under the Presidential Directive 21. In addition, we're the primary agency for Infrastructure Systems Recovery Support Function under the National Disaster Recovery Framework. The impacts of these hurricanes I've mentioned, adding to the pre-existing conditions of the grid in Puerto Rico, has led to an unprecedented restoration period. The significant damage done to the electricity sector and the complicated nature of an island response created major logistical challenges, as mentioned by Mr. Byrne. In the wake of these, DOE has received $17 million in mission assignments from FEMA to provide technical assistance for hurricane response and recovery. In addition, we received $13 million in the supplemental funding for response and recovery activities. This gives us the opportunity to help the Commonwealth incorporate resilience and reliability into the new Puerto Rico grid. The hurricane season of 2017 serves to highlight the need for a continued and adaptive focus on energy system resilience. The presence of responders at utility operations and early engagement with utilities is crucial, especially in the presence of federal and state emergency operations centers. Administration has conveyed in numerous hearings that Congress should revisit the Stafford Act and Recovery Act efforts with focus on resilience and investments that will mitigate further damage. As mentioned, having the flexibility to do more than just restore back to pre-existing conditions in a situation like Puerto Rico is crucial. We also brought in the power marketing authorities with their knowledge of building systems, and long-term deployments have really stressed our capacity, as this has been the longest deployment that we've ever had at 6 months. We are working on a plan to develop Puerto Rico's grid, listing actions and options for building in greater resiliency, power quality, and reliability. It will include developing a power flow model for Puerto Rico that allows better both grid planning and grid operations. This will inform FEMA's overarching comprehensive plan as required in the supplemental funding legislation. DOE is also engaged the Southern States Energy Board to provide support to the Puerto Rico governor on territorial, regulatory, and policy issues to set up the best structure for going forward in the future. I am grateful for and impressed by the hard work of the emergency responders and recovery experts during this hurricane season. Over the next several months, our primary focus in Puerto Rico will be working with our partners to support the ability of the power grid and the critical infrastructure to withstand future events in a reliable, resilient, and affordable manner. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lopez, you're up for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And in interest of time, I'll try to consolidate my remarks. You have the full testimony in front of you. So good morning, Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, Representative Colon, members of the subcommittee. My name is Pete Lopez. I'm the Regional Administrator for Region 2, which compromises New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and 8 federally recognized Indian nations. So very pleased to be part of this assemblage today. Just to put it in perspective, my experience in New York State as a state assembly member gave me the opportunity to be involved in intense storm-related recovery. In my region, Northern Appalachia, we were impacted by Hurricanes Irene and Lee, Tropical Storm Lee. And just to put in perspective, my family was homeless, my parents homeless. We struggled with many of the similar issues impacting Puerto Rico. The challenge, of course, of geographic isolation and the socioeconomic conditions also gave me a sensitivity and an understanding of how complicated it can be to respond when you have an isolated and economically disadvantaged community. So effectively, the more disadvantaged, the slower and more painful the recovery. On a personal note, I also have family on the island, and I can tell you, as I work with my colleagues, and I'm very pleased with their engagement, we take this personally. We are galvanized by their struggles, and we are working intensely to provide results. I traveled to the islands last fall. Actually, I took office in October, just as the storms were hitting. We made our initial visit, and the issue there was to focus not just on structure and function, but also on coordinating and seeking problem-solving opportunities, being creative with our problem-solving. Plan to go back in the next few weeks to engage as we transfer between response and recovery, each being a little bit different. So with that said, we've been very pleased to work with FEMA, Army Corps, our other colleagues, our state and federal partners, our local partners. We realize that the work is not complete and that this will be a long time, a long journey, just to sum it up. So in terms of our actions, we've spent roughly $69 million. We have other funds that we're working to engage with as we move into recovery. You'll see a listing of all the work that we've done, a sampling of it. Just in highlighting, we've addressed chemical and hazardous waste facilities, Superfund and oil sites. We've addressed water treatment plants, sewer treatment plants, ambient air monitoring, hazardous waste, hazardous household waste, vegetative debris, the list goes on. Coast Guard, partnering with them to remove oil and hazardous substances. We are very focused and we will remain committed. So as we move forward, we are very pleased to be part of the response protocol under FEMA. We are actively engaged, and we are not lead on issues, but we're helping support, almost like wingmen. I guess that's the best way to describe us. We're tucked right in there and working collectively. So the other thing that is of note as we move forward is that there are very serious issues, and I just want to highlight this quickly. As we rebuild, we also want to make sure that there's capacity from the local governments to be sustainable as well. So in terms of their management structure, their organizational structure, the financing of solid waste landfill maintenance over time, those are serious issues to us, and we will be helping to support that as well. So in sum, our success depends on our communication, our integration, state, federal, local level, and our creative thinking. So we thank Congress for the resources, and we are doing our best. We will continue. Public safety, health of the environment matters, and we're right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Aronson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, Representative Gonzalez Colon, and members of the subcommittee. It's a privilege to be here to discuss power restoration in Puerto Rico, and I will also abbreviate my remarks as best I can. In the interest of time, I'll also direct you to the pictures that we're going to have rolling. Pictures really are worth 1,000 words to understand the level of devastation and the amount of restoration work that's going on. I'm here today testifying on behalf of the Edison Electric Institute member companies, which is all of the nation's investor-owned electric companies. When duty calls, EEI's companies, crews, and contractors bring decades of experience and unique capabilities to restore power for those affected by natural disasters. That spirit of mutual assistance is a hallmark of our industry and was on full display throughout the historic 2017 hurricane season, as all segments of the industry worked closely with our federal partners in response to Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Nate, as well as the wildfires that ravaged the western United States. And that coordination continues today in support of the people of Puerto Rico. As has been noted, 2 days ago, we marked the 6-month anniversary of the day Hurricane Maria made landfall. This devastating Category 4 hurricane impacted all critical infrastructure on the island, including the energy grid. The magnitude of destruction to the grid is unlike anything we have ever seen on the U.S. mainland, making this power restoration mission more difficult than other missions. As of today, the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or PREPA, reports that more than 93% of the 1.47 million customers who can receive electricity have had their power restored. It's important to note that one customer is equal to one electric meter, but that one meter may serve several people. That progress could not have been made without the partnership of PREPA, FEMA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and its contractors, and the many mutual assistance crews who have worked tirelessly to restore power for the people of Puerto Rico. And while there has been significant progress, nobody deserves to be without power for this long. EEI, our member companies, and the rest of the industry remain committed to this mission and to helping our fellow citizens on the island. To that end, I would like to explain our industry's role and the challenges we have faced in supporting power restoration. PREPA made its initial ask for mutual assistance from the mainland industry on October 31st. Since then, nearly 60 investor-owned electric companies and public power utilities have committed personnel, equipment, and materials to the effort. Within days of receiving the request for mutual assistance, 2 industry storm bosses, or incident response experts, were deployed to Puerto Rico to assess the situation on the ground and develop a comprehensive restoration plan. It should be noted that a contingent of industry crews from New York, including EEI member crews, has been on island since October from an agreement between Governors Rosselló and Cuomo. On November 22nd, Governor Rosselló appointed Carlos Torres, who was formerly of Con Edison, as the Power Restoration Coordinator to oversee the multi-pronged restoration effort and to align the work of industry, PREPA, the Army Corps, and others committed to the mission. This unified command has been instrumental in managing the large, complex restoration safely while ensuring crews, capabilities, and materials are being used effectively. It really is a shared effort that has embodied the motto, one team, one mission. Applying lessons learned on the mainland, an incident command structure was created for PREPA that included an incident command staff in San Juan and 7 incident management teams, or IMTs. The arrival of crews for mainland electric companies was the culmination of months of critical but much less visible work necessary to make this effort a success. In most deployments, workers load their equipment into their trucks and set out on the roads to help. In this case, nearly 20 barges were needed to get trucks and equipment to Puerto Rico, and workers had to be flown to the island. All told, more than 3,000 workers from the mainland industry have been a part of this mission. Companies from across the mainland also have sent stocks of critical materials, including poles, transformers, insulators, wire, and other necessities to ensure crews had equipment and material compatible with the island system. It is important to understand that companies committed to this mutual assistance effort are doing so at cost, on a not-for-profit basis. As of today, about 900 mutual assistance workers remain on the island. In every single restoration, a point is reached where a substantial amount of work is completed and the amount and type of workers needed to complete the job is reassessed. The restoration plan ensures that crews now will converge into the hardest hit areas and that the right number of workers remain actively engaged and continue to work safely and as quickly as possible. This deliberate right-sizing of the workforce is typical. As is the case with all restorations, the final customers will be the most difficult and time-consuming to restore. In this case, the terrain on the island is a recurring challenge. While the response in Texas and Florida to Hurricanes Harvey and Irma were extremely efficient, we were reluctant to compare storms as each has unique challenges. It is natural to suggest that the response in Puerto Rico should have been executed as it was on the mainland, but there are significant differences that made the situation on the island unique. For one, you cannot pre-position crews on the island for fear that responders would become victims. Then there's the challenge of getting people and equipment to the island. Finally, material availability is imperative. We stockpile equipment on the mainland and made as much available to PREPA as possible, but their energy grid had some unique components and their stockpiles were diminished. Our industry's mantra is to be better today than we were yesterday and better tomorrow than we are today. While it's difficult to extrapolate too much from such an anomalous event, we will be undertaking a full after-action study to ensure we glean lessons that can help preparations on the mainland and to prevent a similar long-term recovery should Puerto Rico be impacted by another catastrophic hurricane. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here for the subcommittee and for the subcommittee's interest in this important topic, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Staff Sergeant Sutton, you're up. 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman, ranking members, Ms. Gonzalez. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I initially flew over to Puerto Rico on the 26th of September, and I stayed all the way till December 2nd of 2017. From getting over there, I pretty much, I went on my own accord. I was actually living in Maui, Hawaii at the time. Never heard anything about anything on the news about the devastation, what's going on, how bad this actually was. I ended up getting a hold of a few military members that I knew were already over there, and they went ahead and sent me current active photos, videos, and anything that I could possibly get my hands on over there. I went on my own accord, touchdown. As soon as I got in the airport, I honestly felt like I was the only person coming into Puerto Rico trying to bring aid, just as a regular person. My flight, obviously can fit over 400 people, but, there's 10. I came in. As soon as I touched down, I found the, FBI located, Homeland Security, identifying them myself, let them know, hey, I have a, security clearance with DOD. I'm retired military. I was working with the 82nd Airborne Division, worked alongside with Special Forces groups, and been deployed multiple times. And, here to volunteer, whatever you need. Told them my capabilities of being able to rebuild homes, provide power, AC, anything you need, I can make it happen. They said they didn't need any help, apply online. So I said, okay. I went on my own accord, went throughout Puerto Rico, ran into a few police officers. Their biggest advice was, you need to be really careful because you're not from around here. Right now, there's no communications outside the airport, period. Our communications are just here. The moment you leave the airport, I can't tell you what's going to happen to you. There was obviously looting, people being killed over the small amount of dollars they do have in their pockets. And moving around the city was practically impossible. Curfews were in place, limited supplies, limited fuels, and people were very desperate. There's multiple times that I would go throughout Puerto Rico, and it's just a madhouse. People would either rush your car, rush your vehicle, just trying to get whatever supplies you got on you. There's multiple times I would go out with, people, and honestly, it would be like too late. A lot of people, you would show up saying, hey, I heard you had an elderly member or a child here. We're here to help you out. And unfortunately, they passed away the night prior with dehydration, malnutrition, and a lot of people throughout the months became more devastated to the point where they took their own lives by either jumping off mountains or cliffs because they knew nobody was going to come. Nobody was coming. It had been months. And, being without power, being out without water, being without food, it was honestly probably harder than any deployment I've ever been on in my life to see the amount of, suffering, human suffering. We were all looking for answers. I myself, moved in to a church member's home in Dorado. To paint a little better picture for you, for Dorado and Bayamon, that's probably one of the worst sides you could probably go in. It's probably one of the worst rough areas of D.C. you could ever think of, New York, L.A., wherever you want to think of. And being a guy that's not from the island, obviously it's not very safe for myself. I took the chance, took the risk because I knew these people were in need, and they definitely needed some assistance. Throughout the months, I did everything I could, from getting medical supplies, getting food to people in hard-to-reach areas, and every single time I'll go out, I would be the first person that anyone would ever see. They would let me know, hey, I haven't seen mayor, I haven't seen FEMA, I haven't seen Red Cross. Can you help me? And I would definitely go out of my way, working with local hospitals, working with local organizations. Honestly, I did it all myself. I tried helping them out with FEMA. I would work with them to try to deliver their supplies for them. And a lot of the responses that I would get would be, there's a lot of political things happening here, and I can't make this happen. Can you do it for me? And they would give me addresses and locations, and I would go to them and make that happen for anybody out in Puerto Rico. I would even, take messages from random people over the internet to say, hey, this is my address. My grandfather, hasn't seen anybody. He's a retired veteran. Can you help me out? And I would go out of my way to make that happen. And honestly, the 3 months that I was there, I have no words to really describe, the devastation that's currently out there, and it's still currently going on. So, thank you for your time. Look forward to your questions.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Chair's now going to recognize my colleague from Puerto Rico for the first round of questions. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, all members of the panel. I'll try to be brief. The first question, I will jump directly to Mr. Mike Byrne. It's, what do we need to complete the restoration of power in 30 days?
I think where we're at right now in power is, if it was easy, it got done already. Yeah, and even the easy part was hard in Puerto Rico because of the challenges of the terrain and challenges of the condition of the system.
I know that part, and I know also I just got four minutes now. But what do we need? If it's money, if it's resources, I do know you reimbursed the government, PREPA, for the resources and the contracts they're doing with the mutual assistance agreement. What we know, the Corps of Engineers is going to continue to have some contracts until the April 7th. My concern is that that hiring process will take some time, and you still got a lot of those contractors on the island until the April 7th. And we got still a lot of municipalities in the center part of the island, and we don't have all the materials on the island yet. And although Corps of Engineers is saying that the island will be 100% recovered, maybe in May or June, the reality is that when I sat with those personnel, they're saying July, they're saying August, and maybe more than that. And I don't want to, lie to my people back home. I know you neither. What do we need to make a plan for a 30-day repowering of the island?
I quite frankly have the trust in the Unified Command that's been in place for the last 6 months. They've been able to do difficult things, and they have a plan now. And again, in fact, talking to Carlos Torres, that we both know and respect, and the work he's doing there, he said, Mike, that the hard part to do is the stuff we're doing now, and it's like working on a car engine. You could bring in lots more mechanics, but you can only get so many hands into the vehicle at one time. So we're focused on that, and if the smart people at PREPA or at the Corps or any of those contractors can come up with a way to do this faster, we're going to support it. I'm going to support it 1,000%.
What about the materials?
We're going to continue to provide materials and get them in. As you know, we had challenges with material. There was other disasters going on. There was, we were making material, and 30 days later, it was getting put to use in terms of things. But again, we're not going to let up until we get all the material we need and get that last mile. As we've talked about, some of these houses are up a road that got washed out that are, way in the back where we have to get to, but again, we're not going to stop until we get to them.
I will ask you to have, again, another meeting with the Corps of Engineers and new people from FEMA and the people from PREPA to see how we can maybe cut some red tape in terms of knowing if we can make a plan of, cut those long months and days and have actually like a final expectation, how long it would take to the people. People don't know how long they need to wait to actually have power again in their homes. And you know that. I mean, you are living on the island. You know how it's been living there. The next question would be, because I'm running out of time, it's what deadlines have passed or are approaching to such things as 8 applications or 100% federal funding? And those terms are statutory or administrative. I know, and I want to thank the people from EPA for answering my letter in terms of 100% federal assistance in the removal of debris, and thanking the President for allowing the new waiver for 60 days and making that happen. Thanking the administration for that, and I just received the letter on the 19th of March. That's one of the questions. The second one would be for the whole panel in terms of the Department of Energy. I know you're helping the government of Puerto Rico, specifically PREPA. One thing is patching up what we have. Is the system is going to be strong enough to resist even a tropical storm in August? or even to face another hurricane season in 3 months? Are we rebuilding? Are we patching up? Or, I mean, what's the next step to repowering the island and make a better system?
So the first job was to get restoration, and that's what Mike's been talking about. We're looking at both short-term and longer-term things that are needed to really get that resiliency built into it. And as you saw the San Juan blackout a couple of weeks ago, is an indication that some of this equipment has probably been has a life expectancy that's reduced as a function of going through it. So the teams, Army Corps, FEMA, our people on the ground are putting up as much as they can the best systems with the equipment they have and everything. But some of those things over the next few years may fail prematurely. And part of what we want to do is make sure that we're constantly increasing things like inspection schedules and all of these routine maintenance things that are accelerated so we can predict and understand how fast we need to replace things relative to their normal life. Those are the kind of things that need to happen. We need to make sure that there are contract paths for getting things like microgrids in place. There are clear ideas of how to best serve some of the rural communities, and that they understand options and those decisions can be made. So those are the kind of things you need to think about. I think the key is vigilance now and vigilance as we go forward, and not to, and even if there's not another major event this summer, you want to continue to work toward making sure you have that resiliency and those things like the maintenance schedules set up and in place and operating.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses again. Staff Sergeant Sutton, thank you for your service to your country and also for your willingness to pitch in at your own expense. And just think that your involvement here was heroic, and we really appreciate it. I'm sure the families of Puerto Rico appreciate that as well. Mike Byrne, let's talk about the decision of FEMA to award the contract for providing 30 million meals to victims in Puerto Rico to Tiffany Brown, single person. She had a little LLC that she set up. So we got all these people without food, without water. A month after the storm, so 30 days out, they've already been without food for a month. And we award a $156 million contract to Tiffany Brown. And she's already on the website, on your website, as having defaulted on a previous small contract for $27,000 to provide beans and rice and spaghetti. She's already bellied up on that one. She's on the website in default. She can't do that. 27. So we give her a contract for $156 million. How does that happen? How does that happen?
So we went through our normal contracts, and we followed the federal procurement practices to award that contract.
Now, that was anything but normal. That has to be abnormal, right?
It was, we issued about just under 2,000 contracts during that period of time, and the block that that particular contract was in, we did end up awarding 6 other contracts to other suppliers. So we were able to meet the demand. Didn't really impact our demand, and we also held this individual and this company accountable. We did not pay them $156 million. We only paid them for what they delivered.
But I mean,
$50,000.
If you hired them, then you didn't hire somebody else who could do the job. So I don't want to gloss over that. But I mean, my point is that she should not have got that contract in the first place. One, for capacity, just one person. She hired a wedding caterer. This is a disaster. So there's a sense of urgency here that I don't think is being shared by FEMA, to be honest with you. And then she's got a prior history here. So here's what I'm thinking. I mean, we have companies that provide meals ready to eat to our military, and they do a good job. Now, we don't need meals ready to eat because, they're more expensive because they've got to last for 5 years. However, we got companies that do that type of thing. Why wouldn't we reach out to one of those companies, have them bid, or just you know, buy the stuff or arrange for acquisition through one of those companies, and then we'll replace it later if we have to. But the thing is, we shouldn't have waited 30 days to get the bid out, and then once it got out, we shouldn't have given it to Tiffany Brown. And you know, I'm not even mentioning the Jones brothers who got the contract for plastic roofing.
Well, sir, we did distribute over 63 million meals, and even this week, we're still distributing every day, you know, tens of thousands of meals out there. But, you know, we're all about getting better, and if there's anything we can do to improve and make sure that we're doing better, and we don't even let one of our 2,000 contracts slip through the cracks and not be effective, then we'll do that. We'll certainly work to get better at that.
Let me just say, you know, my background is construction management. I was an iron worker for 20 years. That's what I got my degree in. And we usually had a list of qualified bidders, people that had a history and a record and a reputation for doing the right thing and doing it effectively. And so that when the job came up, we had a pool of people that we could actually reach out to, that we could rely upon. And you don't operate that way. And, you know, we also have performance bonds where we have the contractor post a performance bond where if they go belly up, we just grab their bond and we go on to the next person. I don't see that going on at FEMA.
Well, we dealt with this contract quickly and effectively in that we
effectively?
Well, we did away with it.
Are you kidding me?
We stopped the contract.
No.
Yeah.
Firing the person is not handling the contract effectively. Having them go belly up and non-perform, and then you fire them, that's not effectively. Picking a good contractor that provides the relief that the taxpayer paid for, that's efficiently, right?
Well, we did manage to do that for the vast majority of the, again, you know, slightly
except
less
for this
than 2,000.
$106 million contract. I don't know. I'm not hearing what I thought I'd be hearing after seeing what's going on here. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Byrne, with this new language about allowing the rebuilding to go up to industry standards, not necessarily just the status quo ante, is that going to be a benefit for Puerto Rico specifically? Because wasn't their infrastructure really degraded? And so, yeah, it was a very bad storm, but because some of it wasn't up to industry standards, the damage was that much worse?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman. This language that you guys gave us really is going to streamline our process, enable us to do the right thing. I mean, just imagine the discussions we would have had of he said, she said, of what was the condition before, what wasn't, what was old, what was new. We now don't have to worry about that. We just focus on doing the right thing. And there was one other thing that you called for in the legislation, for us to develop a plan with the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico to bring in the best and the brightest to design the right solution, not just project by project, but what's the right solution for the whole infrastructure system. And we have 180 days to put that together, and we're going to let that be our guide as to how we build this back better and stronger.
So they needed attention on the infrastructure even before the storm, and so having it go through as painful as this has been, on the backside, is it your expectation that we will have a much stronger infrastructure system there in terms of the electricity and the water than we had previous to the storm?
Yes, that's exactly the opportunity that's in front of us. We're going to be vigilant. We're going to be direct. We're going to make sure that we use, when we bring in some of the experts, my colleagues on the panel with me, to get their advice from their smart people so that, you know, we're not the experts in power. We're going to rely on the experts in power to tell us what the right thing to do, and we're going to use the authorities you gave us and the funding you gave us to make sure it happens. Good.
Well, we want to see that put to use, and we want the folks back on their feet. I'm going to yield the remaining time I have to my friend Jennifer, and so I will recognize her now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got another question. It's regarding the deeds or titles of the home, of the owners of those homes. And that, you know, Mr. Byrne, that's one of the major problems we got on the island. A lot of the people are having a lot of difficulties applying for housing and individual assistance, as they cannot document their home values, or even the homeowners, because they are living in lands that were family owns or living there from from a lot of years. And I actually filed a bill with Congressman Espaillat that addressed this issue. I just want to know if FEMA is willing to sit with me and HUD department. Actually, I already did that with the Deputy Secretary of HUD, trying to address this issue that has been there for many years. Are you willing to do that?
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing more heartbreaking than to see somebody lose their home and then have paperwork get in the way. We encourage those families to go to the disaster recovery centers. We've got 64 of them set up throughout the island, or even get back on the phone with us. We'll find a way to work that, and I look forward to working with you on it.
I'm glad to hear that, because that's one of the biggest situations in the island. Even I know that even locally, the construction code grandfather a lot of those informal kind of living, and actually the hurricane just spotlighted the situation in the island. Another situation, and I will this will be to EPA. How has this situation, the hurricane, affected the status of the landfills in Puerto Rico? Because I know the debris and the proposals submitted for alternate debris disposal has been increasing after the hurricane, and we already got a problem with a lot of landfills before the hurricane. And the third question, because I know I'm going to run out of time, Mr. Byrne, is regarding, you know that PREPA is under the bankruptcy situation. So one of the main problems we got is PREPA don't got the money to buy the materials in the first place, the liquidity to buy the materials, and then got the reimbursement from FEMA to make that happen. So that will, make longer the process of the recovery. So that's one of the reasons I know the Department of Energy and the Corps of Engineers were involved in the process. How we can make that process a faster one, and with your leadership there helping us out to trigger a faster situation.
Thank you, Ms. Colon. So in regards to landfills, we share your urgent concern, and to answer your question, the storms have just made a situation that was difficult and really a crisis situation worse. So we've worked hard with FEMA and our colleagues to intercept waste before it's put into the landfill. So whether it's household medical waste, household waste, hazardous waste, vegetative debris, any number of potential additions to the landfills, we're working to intercept it and then manage it. In some cases, shipping it off island for proper assessment. The issue, of course, is the long term, and we're very dedicated to working with the Commonwealth and USVI, because they have the same problem on their islands, to get them to a point where they have landfills that are secure. We know that many of the landfills, none of them are in full compliance. We have 11 that we have, 13 that we have orders against because they are potentially contaminating groundwater. They could be hazards to the community. Our challenge is that the ultimate responsibility lies with the Commonwealth in terms of managing and operating. So our goal, and we've developed a strategic plan in Region 2 with EPA, we would like to reach out to the Commonwealth, bring all the stakeholders together, and begin looking at how do we address solid waste universally. How do we reduce the amount of waste going to landfills? What do we do for source separation recycling? We'd like to be part of that process. How do we drive funding towards the island, which the island will control, to put in secure landfills with proper liners, proper leachate collection, to make ones that are unsafe, close them down. So we are very much united with you. The term crisis applies, and we are addressing this very urgently. We share your concern.
As to
let me the time's up. I'm going to recognize, because we're going to have the vote called, so if there's time on the back end, I'd love to give you an opportunity. Before I recognize our friend from the Virgin Islands, I have a statement from the American Public Power Association. I'd like to ask unanimous consent that this be made part of the record, and without objection, it will be made part of the record. The chair does note the presence of Ms. Plaskett from the Virgin Islands. I ask unanimous consent that she be waived in and be allowed to participate without objection. So ordered, and then I now would like to recognize her for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here this morning. Part of the Oversight and Government Reform's purpose is to oversee and ensure that operations of the government are working smoothly and efficiently. In October, bipartisan members of this committee sent a letter to DHS and have been requesting from FEMA a response for that letter related to these hurricanes. We have not to date received the documents from that, and that is something that is very, very unnerving and potentially very problematic in our ability to continue to do our work. In the course of our own investigation in this committee, one of the things that we've recognized is in the response potentially some communications problem between agencies and how agencies work in getting supplies to the people that are affected by these hurricanes. One of the instances we found out were surrounding Walmart and emergency food. And we have emails and text messages between Walmart and government officials in Congress and Puerto Rico who discuss the desperate need for fuel at the Walmart stores to be able to sustain the food that was there. In one instance, on September 23rd and 24th, a Walmart official wrote to the Puerto Rico official saying, Walmart, any word on the fuel situation on the island? Puerto Rico, there's some redaction, no word yet. I put in numerous requests with FEMA and haven't heard from anything. Because of your issue, I've put in a request to be embedded into FEMA headquarters tomorrow, which will allow me to get this sorted out directly. I'll let you know if anything happens. So our committee then issued to both myself and Ranking Member Cummings sent a letter to Trey Gowdy, which I would ask unanimous consent to be put into the record, which is a request regarding our bipartisan investigation of the response to the hurricanes and requesting information and outlining what we found out from the investigation in Walmart. So, Mr. Byrne, how was Walmart's emergency request for generator fuel handled by FEMA? First, is there any objection?
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Byrne, what was Walmart's emergency request for generator fuel handled by FEMA?
At that point, I don't think I was at the response, but I am familiar with the issue. And at that point in time in a response, we're focused, we have to prioritize where we're going to get emergency fuel to, and our focus was on hospitals, dialysis centers, and community health centers, and public safety buildings.
How many generators were brought down to Puerto Rico?
Total about 1,900.
1,900. And is there a protocol to have generators in places where food is being stored for food to be able? Is that within the purview of FEMA to get generators to those locations?
We do, but with the issue of private sector companies, I think we have to be cautious here. This really is, if we're going to rely on FEMA to be the single source for both the private sector and the public sector, I think that's going to be a problem.
The question is have protocols to be able to do it? I understand the issue with private sector, but we heard earlier in the testimony that there was issues in contracting for emergency food to be brought down. So when you have food there on the ground, does it then become a priority to make sure that that food supply doesn't become perishable?
We certainly take responsibility for everything we bring in.
Okay. And will you, but one of the things I want to get back to with regard to the documents that we requested in October, do you have a date when you're going to respond to the letter that was sent by Chairman Gowdy and Ranking Member Cummings requesting the information from DHS?
This is the first that I've been made aware of that, but I'm sure that I will take that back and we will make sure we respond.
This is the first time that you heard about the letter that we requested information through FEMA from DHS?
Yes, ma'am. My role is to be the leader of the response in Puerto Rico. I'm not really involved in the aspects that you just described.
Okay, so will you get that message to Brock Long for us?
I will carry it forward personally.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know, Mr. Burns, if FEMA has a plan for getting fuel to food store generators in the event of another hurricane if it's being knocked out?
We're developing plans right now to have pre-positioned a lot of fuel and generators on the island. We haven't worked out any details, but again, I think we're gonna ask the private sector to also make plans, because this has got to be a whole community and not just us that's supplying all of the emergency fuel.
I agree completely. So as my colleague Jennifer Gonzalez Colon said, we're now several months before hurricane season again. Predictions are that this hurricane season should be the same level of activity as last year's. Are we prepared for a hurricane in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, or one or two? Mr. Parks, is your department prepared for that?
We prepare every year for the...
Are you prepared for the level of hurricanes happening in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico that occurred? And yes, that's a yes or a no. Are you prepared for it?
Our role, the simple answer is, I would say we're not, because we're not, that's not our function.
If you are called upon, are you saying that you have no role to play in that when
No,
called
ma'am, I
by
didn't
FEMA?
say that. You asked for a yes or no answer.
Is your agency prepared when called upon by FEMA
Absolutely.
to support that? Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
And Mr. Burns, is FEMA have in place prioritization for the hurricane season that is coming, knowing the compromised state that the Caribbean Americans are in right now?
We're going to take extraordinary steps to make sure we have stuff in place, but I'd have to be honest, it's going to be a rough year. There's a fragile, stability that we've built, and we're going to need to take extra steps to make sure we have extra on the island, and we're doing that.
Thank you.
Correct.
I yield back.
Gentleman generally yields back. With that, I don't see any additional members. Would you like to do another round?
Mr. Chairman, I would like, if you don't mind, to introduce to the record a letter I sent to the Corps of Engineers on the 13th of March of this year about the power restoration to the record, if you don't mind.
Without objection. Mr. Lynch, you have something for the record?
Yeah, I just have one quick question, but I also have observations on federal response to Maria in Puerto Rico. I'd like to have this accepted into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. And the question I had is, so Mr. Byrne, I realize you did.
Well, hold on. Let me just see. Do you have any questions? Let me recognize.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I thought she yelled. No problem.
Gentlelady's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question will be to Edison Energy. My question will be, how stable or reliable is the repair grid right now?
Thank you, Representative Gonzalez-Colón. So I want to point to some of the things that were said by Mr. Parks and Mr. Byrne. While the grid before Hurricane Maria made landfall was certainly in disrepair, I think the fact that we have the ability to not just repair and replace, as FEMA rules would dictate, but repair and replace to code is going to give us a leg up on a little bit more stability and resilience from the grid. I'd also note the quality of work under the Unified Command from the mutual assistance crews, from the Army Corps of Engineers and its associated contractors, and certainly from PREPA is cause for some confidence that we're going to be in a better spot. And then the last thing I would say is, and this is true of the entire hurricane season, Mother Nature did one heck of a house cleaning and took out a lot of the debris and vegetation that obviously can interfere with the safe transmission and distribution of electricity. So while I think to the points that were just made, we need to be vigilant and we need to continue to do the work, we are in a more resilient situation than we were prior to the 2017 season. You
just brought me a question to FEMA, and that is that some of the people from the Corps of Engineers were telling me that they were never got the mission for FEMA to rebuild in a new way, because they just got the provision of repair. And I just want to put in the record that we managed to include an amendment during the Sector Supplemental and the Budget Act, an amendment to the Section 2601. The Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management may provide assistance pursuant to the Section 428 of the Robert Stafford Act relief for critical services to replace or restore the function of the facility or system to industry standard without regard to the pre-disaster condition of the facility or system, to replace or restore components of the facility not damaged by the disaster where necessary to fully effectuate a replacement or restoration of disaster-damaged components. So that provision was included because precisely all the restrictions your office told me during that process, during the hearings, during the CODELs that were on the island. So that's included in the amendment this Congress passed. And I think you already got the provisions in laws, so there's no excuse now to say that the Army Corps or FEMA don't got the provisions to make that happen.
Yes, definitely. I mean, there's nothing that we're more excited about than that and the ability to actually do the right thing. But the call was accurate. The mission assignment we gave them was for emergency work, not permanent work. And really now's the part where we got to be deliberate. We have to take time to take a look and figure out what the right thing to do is going forward, because we've got an extraordinary chance. As he said it did wipe things clean, destroyed 80% of the infrastructure. Now we get a chance. The bad news is people have suffered, and we feel for that. But the good news is we're going to be able to, we have an opportunity to build this back the right way.
Mr. Byrne, another of the questions regarding the Army Corps and the mayors is about how long it takes the reimbursement process. And during the last hearing from the Homeland Security, most of the mayors even Mr. Long is saying that you're dealing with a lot of requests from many states, but without the resources to manage a lot of those requests. Are you saying that you don't have enough people to manage the requests of many of the reclamation from the municipalities?
Well, we're in as far as the payback, we recognize we want to move faster with the mayors and the documentation process that we've got in place. I think in any disaster that I've worked, the initial part of this is usually a little bumpy, but I think we'll smooth that out. But as far as more people, my plan is to hire more people on Puerto Rico. As I said, I have 52% of my workforce is Puerto Ricans right now. I'm going to try to get to 90% by the one-year anniversary, and we're going to bring on as many people as we need to provide the level of service that you are looking for. And
Mr. Chairman, one last question, and I will ask Mr. Byrne to file that on record for the committee, and it will be regarding the community disaster loan that I know the FEMA and the Treasury Department, actually the Secretary of the Treasury is on the island today. Can you submit to this committee information regarding the status of the CDL for the municipalities and the state government regarding that during the next 5 days? Thank you, and I yield back.
Generally yields back. Mr. Lynch?
Sure. Just to follow up, Mr. Byrne, we also, following up on Ms. Plaskett's request, we also have a request in for documents regarding the Tribute Contracting LLC documents. And so we would like to have those documents provided by Tiffany Brown in order to get that contract. As you know, she's suing FEMA. She's seeking a $70 million settlement. And the wedding caterer is also suing to get their money from her. And so these documents will be made available in the court proceedings. We're going to get them anyway, but it would be a sign of good faith if FEMA provided those documents rather than us have to go to the court and get those documents from them. Okay?
Yes, sir. I'll take that back.
All right. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank you. The votes. You want to yield her the rest of your time?
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Sutton, thank you again, as so many of my colleagues have thanked you, and all of the people who came to volunteer in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands during the tragedies and the issues that we had after the hurricanes. You arrived, you said, about a week after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. What was your visual account, and what do you know about the food shortages that were going on there?
Well, the visual account. I mean, the island looked like not just a hurricane, a tornado hit it. I mean, you're talking from power lines, houses. I mean,
sure.
What was left was a frame of a house, not a house.
Sure.
And
because there are tornadoes inside of hurricanes.
Oh, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, this one, yeah. I mean, I would almost believe it the way it looked. I went there the year prior, and Puerto Rico's beautiful.
Right.
It's you got
so what about
everywhere.
The food storage? Because I don't have a lot of time.
Okay, food stores.
Food shortages. Did you see any?
Oh yeah. From most of the food that was there was available. You're talking about San Juan being immaculate shape, but outside of San Juan, nobody had food. No one had abilities to get that food either.
And did you see any, or were you witness to anyone who lost their life during this time, not from injuries from the hurricane, but potentially from food shortages?
Yes, ma'am. There were several elderly, young children under the age of 5, people who died of dehydration, died of malnutrition, and it's just honestly it's because of the lack of supply of food, inability to get to the food, and a lot of those collection points for FEMA were you come to us, we don't come to you, and the hard part is people lost their cars and abilities and they live up on the mountains.
Right. Jeffrey Parks, who's a key member of the Joint Task Force, Katrina, arrived in Puerto Rico around September 30th and stayed for 10 days. In a statement for the record, he concludes that the lack of communications in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria was, quote, the single largest response failure. Mr. Sutton, do you agree with that assessment?
I completely agree with that.
And why do you say that?
There was no communications. When I landed in the airport, the only communications were inside the airport.
Right.
Even 15, 20 days after, the only forms of communication were inside of a RV in a Tuado.
Right.
Outside of that, no communications.
Mr. Byrne, I know that just trying to operate in the Virgin Islands right after the storm, I remember Jennifer and I were able to text a couple of times in between, but you found people congregating in one small area because the communications had gone out. Do you have communications in place? What are the plans if something like this happens again to get emergency communication out to the critical areas?
Yeah, we've taken steps. We've actually given satellite phones to all 78 mayors, but we're going to do more. We're trying to restore, get as much back of the existing system and strengthen it before the season starts. There's a huge effort underway for that, and that's really a public-private partnership because the normal comms companies are also engaged in helping us get the powers and the towers back.
And what about, you talk about the towers, the same Jeffrey Parks talk that says that he wrote to us that he did not see a single temporary cell tower in the 10 days that he was in Puerto Rico. How many temporary cell towers were installed within a month after Maria? And what is the plans in terms of temporary cell towers in the next instance?
I'd have to get back to you with the numbers for that first month of how many temporary cell towers, but we're getting together. We have a summit where we're going to sit down with all of the parts, the municipalities, the mayors, the governor's staff, and to come up with additional plans to make sure that no stone is left unturned in terms of being as ready as we can to get through, as I said earlier, what is going to be potentially a risky season.
Mr. Chairman, I just am really grateful for you for having this hearing. I think it's really important for us to do these assessments now as we're coming up to the hurricane season. My concern is we've heard from the witnesses who are with regard to, do we have microgrids in place? Will they be in place in time for us to be able to power back up as quickly as possible to get things going? I worry about the people who were areas were especially devastated, and people are living in marginal lives right now. People in Anna's Hope on St. Thomas and Coral Bay on St. John, Wim and White Lady on St. Croix, Vieques, people who live in Eduardo. Those are places that were completely obliterated after the hurricanes, and they're living on the edge as it stands. And my great concern is that this committee does what it needs to do to hold the federal government accountable, give them the tools that they need, the support and financing that is going to allow them to be on the ground if, God forbid, this should happen again. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here and being open and honest with us and getting this information back so that we can all do our own parts to ensure that American lives are not lost and that the economies continue moving. Thank you.
Gentlewoman's time's expired. I want to thank the witnesses again for appearing before us today. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit a written opening statement or questions for the record. If there's no further business without objection, the Subcommittee on National Security stands adjourned.